Charleston's oldest auction ledgers hold a quiet wound in their paper, a sequence of entries so precise and so strange that city archivists removed them from public view in 1891. Among the thousands of routine sales recorded at Ryan's Mart, one line of commerce refuses to make sense. Between March and November of 1844, a single woman appears again and again. 17 separate sales, 17 different buyers drawn from the very highest ranks of South Carolina's planter class. Each sale commanded a price higher than the last. Each purchaser wore a name that mattered. The same physical description repeats with an odd, unmistakable detail. 3 dots forming a perfect triangle on the left shoulder blade. The municipal record, in its bureaucratic flatness, insists upon a thing the world around it finds impossible. No precedent explains it. No correspondence from that year clears the fog. When the South Carolina Historical Society finally cataloged the papers in 1923, they placed them under restriction, a single terse admonition stamped across the file. Requires gubernatorial approval for access. Public interest concerns. The ledger remains a small, dark thing in the archives, a record of commerce that behaves like ritual. The spring of 1844 arrived in Charleston with an unusual weather. A harbor fog that crawled inland each morning and held the city in damp, gray silence until long after noon. The auctions on Chalmers Street went on regardless. Ryan's Mart was one of the most prestigious houses. 3 stories of brick, where planters from across the low country came to acquire the labor their fields and rivers demanded. Thomas Gadsden ran the place like a bank. He had been a banker once. As auctioneer, he kept ledgers with the same forensic care. Names and ages, marks and prices, witnesses, notaries. Men came to him because his records could settle estates and disputes. His account books were the scaffolding of legality in a city built on the commerce of human beings. On March 19th, a factor named Nathaniel Claiborne arrived with papers. He claimed to represent a dissolved Savannah estate. He presented ownership of a woman described as household staff. Literate, versed in French, skilled at needlework and music, experienced in managing a house. Gadsden recorded her as Deline, approximately 28, inventory number 84,473, notable marking. 3 dots forming a triangle on the left shoulder blade. The paperwork appeared in order. And yet the woman waited apart from the other merchandise that day, her bearing suggesting a kind of education uncommon among the people gathered on the block. She stood with a neutrality that looked practiced, not frightened, not defiant, merely contained. The bidding began as it always did, with planters calculating future profits against present cost. But the numbers careened. Colonel William Hainsworth opened at $800. Hampton Pinckney answered at $1,000. Then others pushed the price beyond anything Gadsden had seen for a woman, even a skilled house servant. When the hammer fell, Robert Drayton of the Ashley River Plantations had paid $2,800, roughly 10 times the going rate for a comparable woman. The room held its breath. Men exchanged guarded glances and said nothing. Gadsden recorded the sale with the careful hand of habit. Drayton arranged transport. Deline left with him. 3 days later, Claiborne returned to Ryan's Mart with the same woman and fresh papers. Gadsden's professionalism cracked for the first time. "Sir," he said, "I witnessed Colonel Drayton purchase this woman. It is in my ledger." Claiborne smiled with a calm that unsettled Gadsden. "I represent Mr. Drayton's interests now," he said. Circumstances changed. The signature bore Drayton's name. The notary seal matched others Gadsden had seen. Legally, everything was pristine, Property, after all, could be resold. Still, the mood in Gadsden's chest hardened into something he could not name. He accepted the consignment. The second auction followed the same pattern, only more intense. Bidding opened higher and climbed faster. Men who had been absent the first time now competed fiercely. Those who had bid previously stayed away. Charles Coatsworth Pinckney bought Deline for $3,200 and took her to Walterboro. A week later, Claiborne returned, paperwork intact. In mid-April, the fourth sale confirmed a pattern. Each purchaser, a man of impeccable standing, each paid significantly more than his predecessor. Each authorized immediate resale through Claiborne, citing the same language, unsuitable for household requirements, and each did so within days. The woman remained the same, composed, polite when spoken to, utterly unmoved by the escalating sums or the absurd repetition of her passing. Charleston's networks were small and sure. News traveled even where discretion reigned. Gadsden began to hear whispers. Other auctioneers asked innocuous questions about his business. Factors who normally bid for consignments avoided Ryan's Mart when Claiborne was in town. By the sixth sale, the ripple of consequence became visible in the buyers themselves. Drayton, at first a presence in city society, withdrew. His wife left the Ashley River house, citing health concerns. Charles Pinckney stopped frequenting the library and the St. Cecilia balls. Augustus Huger dismissed his overseer and isolated himself on the plantation. The prices climbed. By July, Deline fetched $6,000 from Theodore Gaillard, a sum equating to the value of half a dozen skilled field hands. Gadsden's ledgers maintained their mechanical fidelity, but a private journal, locked in his desk, began to bear a different tone. After the ninth sale, he wrote, "The buyers are not acting rationally. Men who were shrewd negotiators abandon restraint. They seem compelled by something other than economic interest." He exchanged guarded confessions with other professionals, bankers who extended emergency loans, attorneys who drew contracts, factors who moved funds, all noting irregularities. Hampton Pinckney requested a loan of $15,000, a sum a man of his standing should never need. He said he made an investment that was unsuitable, Jonathan Wilmot told Gadsden quietly over dinner, eyes flicking to the room, as though the mere mention of the word could spread contagion. Unsuitable, the same word Claiborne used in the resale authorizations. Unease hardened into action. In September, Gadsden hired David Brunson, a former constable turned private inquiry agent, and asked him a simple, dangerous thing: trace what happens after each sale. Brunson traveled the plantations, questioned overseers and household hands, watched for patterns disguised by politeness. What he reported back confirmed the ledger's quiet horror. Not one planter kept Deline more than 5 days. Most returned her within 48 hours. In conversation, one overseer described Augustus Huger's possession. "He purchased her for Mrs. Huger's attendance," Price told Brunson. The first evening something happened. Huger came out at dawn like a man aged 10 years. He had her confined in the overseer's cabin and sent word arranging resale. No detail beyond unsuitable. Another overseer, Marcus, who had served the Gaillard family for decades, said his master locked himself in a study with the woman and talked with her for hours. When he emerged, Marcus told Brunson, "Mr. Gaillard looked as if he had seen the devil himself. He arranged her immediate return." Brunson dug into Claiborne's past. The factor claimed Savannah ties and the Beaumont estate, but records told another, colder story. The Beaumont estate's dissolution in early 1844 showed no inventory matching this woman. Their final filing listed 11 slaves, all male field hands sold in January. Ship manifests, estate inventories, auction rolls across Georgia and South Carolina. Brunson found nothing that matched Deline or the triangular birthmark. It was as if she had arrived with Claiborne out of nowhere, accompanied by papers that passed legal scrutiny, yet had no origin in the paper trails Brunson could trace. Before Gadsden could reply to the list of impossibilities Brunson laid across his desk, footsteps echoed in the empty hallway outside the office. Both men froze. The auction house should have been closed. Gadsden had sent his assistants home hours earlier. The street door was locked. The door opened without knocking. Nathaniel Claiborne stood in the threshold, his composure as unruffled as the fog outside. "Good evening, Mr. Gadsden," he said, and there was a casualness to his voice that somehow made the ledgered world inside Gadsden's room feel suddenly less certain. Claiborne stepped across the threshold and closed the door behind him, as if the lock were a formality rather than a necessity. He moved with the calm certainty of a man who had rehearsed this moment by repeating it in his head until no surprise remained possible. "I see you have questions," he said. "Curiosity is natural. I thought we might speak plainly." Gadsden braced himself. Brunson's hand hovered near the pistol beneath his coat. The constable's instincts made him impatient with parley. In another life, he would have hauled Claiborne before a magistrate. But the factor's paperwork bore signs of legitimacy that even Brunson, practiced skeptic, could not dismiss. Claiborne's smile never reached his eyes. "Every transaction has been properly documented," he said. "Every legal requirement met. The law does not prevent resale. You are a man of records. Let the records stand." "You call this business," Gadsden said, voice steadying by force. 17 sales of the same woman in 8 months. Men ruined. Behavioral changes. Financial collapse. How is this commerce? Claiborne's expression changed minutely, the first sign of something under the placid surface. "You asked me a question, Mr. Gadsden. I will answer. What she is matters less than what she makes people see. She is an instrument of education. These men have built fortunes on abstraction. The law, account books, market imperatives, they are comfortable lies. She forces them into the particular. She makes ownership real." Brunson's jaw tightened. "If you're admitting to some scheme intended to break men, to defraud them, I'll arrest you." "Arrest me for what?" Claiborne asked, as if the question itself entertained him. "For facilitating perfectly legal sales? For producing documents that will stand against any careless magistrate? The law's edges are blunt. Cruelty passes through them like wind through a sieve. I merely offer a lesson. Participation is voluntary." Gadsden watched the conversation and felt a new fear, colder than any ledger entry could justify. The men who had purchased Deline had not confessed, nor could they easily do so. Their lives had been altered in ways that made public disclosure impossible. Claiborne's words circled truth without landing upon it. "You said there are 19 sales," Gadsden said. "Why a number? Why a sequence? What ends it?" "The sequence completes when those who must learn have been confronted," Claiborne replied. "The curriculum is particular. Some lessons demand a certain audience, men whose positions, philosophies, and practical operations embody a system. You, Mr. Gadsden, run the mechanism. You document it. You sanctify it. You are part of the education." Gadsden felt the floor slope beneath him. The implication was obscene. To be required not merely to observe, but to participate. He imagined his ledgers, those exact columns of names and values, transcribed now into indictment. Claiborne did not need to speak of threats. The possibility was implicit. "You would have me buy her?" Gadsden asked. "You will purchase her for the 18th sale," Claiborne said. "The transaction completes the lesson. You will be given time to prepare. I can arrange financing. It is not the money that matters. It is the confrontation." For 3 days, Gadsden measured his options like a miser weighing coins against ruin. He considered flight, denunciation, confession. He reviewed his private ledger entries, not the neat municipal pages, but the margin notes and the locked journal in which he had cataloged behaviors, loans extended, names of men who had quietly unthreaded from society. To refuse would be to expose himself to whatever Claiborne held in reserve. To accept would be to become the thing he had until now only processed. In the end, he chose the path that felt most like the man he had been. Orderly, rational, precise. He secured loans against the building, against future consignments, signed instruments that would tether him to debt for years. On October 19, 1844, he purchased Deline for $9,000 and entered his own name into the ledger as owner for the first time. The irony scorched him. He had handled thousands of sales. He had never held title. He signed his name, a deliberate, ordinary act, and in doing so, he became the instrument of a lesson he had spent his life facilitating for others. Claiborne's instructions were simple and cruel. "Privacy," he said. "She educates most efficiently without spectators." Gadsden arranged a modest chamber within the auction house. The 3-story brick building, so familiar, felt suddenly like a stage. When Deline arrived that evening, she was as she had always been. Composed, eyes clear, bearing that small triangular mark on her shoulder. She sat across from Gadsden in his private office and spoke as if they were resuming a conversation interrupted rather than beginning something new. Her questions were deceptively ordinary. "How did you enter the auction trade? What was your first sale? Who are the men whose names you can still recall?" They were courtesy questions, until they were not. She moved from the professional to the specific. She asked about a child sold in 1839, about a man with a healed leg recorded as whole, about a woman who had been hidden from bidders when the truth of her despair might have reduced her price. Deline recited names with a calm precision that stunned Gadsden. Sarah, 9 years old, June of 1839. Jacob, scarred left hand, March 1841. Rebecca, begged not to be sold, sold anyway. Gadsden felt the slow collapse of defense. He had once told himself he was a neutral party, an intermediary who made commerce possible and thus kept the city functioning. Deline's recounting was not accusation so much as meticulous arithmetic. Rows of human lives reduced to columns in his own hand, now turned back upon him. She exposed the calculus. "You refine cruelty into efficiency," she said quietly. "You make suffering legible on a page. Do not pretend it is not you who wrote it." She did not berate. She catalogued. She asked him to name the people he had sold, and then read back their stories like entries in a census of broken lives. Each recitation was a mirror Gadsden could not look away from. By dawn, he had no defense left. He authorized her resale the next day, arranging, as he had for others, what felt like an administrative mercy, a transfer that would remove the immediate burden. But the real change had occurred elsewhere, in the ledger of his conscience, and it would not be corrected with signatures. The pattern completed itself. The 18th sale, as Claiborne had directed, went to a man whose position in Charleston had always placed him above the mechanics of sale. a buyer whose name and station represented the philosophies that legitimized the institution. The 19th sale, Claiborne had promised, would not come to pass if Gadsden refused, but Gadsden had not refused in the end. He had taken the lesson and signed his own ruin into being. What happened afterward reverberated through Charleston in ways the papers could not admit. The men who had purchased Deline in sequence altered their lives in private. Some sold land, some freed individuals, some withdrew from society, others succumbed to illness or to the quiet implosion of conviction. Langdon Cheves Jr., the final purchaser, reacted with a violence to his certainty that stunned onlookers. Within days, he manumitted Deline and fled the life he had been raised to defend. His handwriting in the manumission's margins ran jagged and fevered with the fragments of confession, a litany of names, an accounting of cruelties, an attempt to map the damage he suddenly understood he had done. He gave funds for her transport north and formalized her liberty. After that, Deline vanished from traceable records as thoroughly as she had arrived. Gadsden searched for traces, abolitionist societies, free black registers, private recollections in Baltimore and Philadelphia, and found nothing. The woman who unraveled 19 men receded into history in the manner of an apparition, legal proof of her freedom, and then silence. Gadsden's life proceeded like a ledger in arrears. He attempted to compile an account, to render the sequence into language that might be intelligible to others. His notebooks grew into manuscripts, all unfinished. He moved north later in life, carried the weight of recollection with him, and died in 1863, leaving behind pages that began and then stopped. The municipal ledgers from Ryan's Mart remained, but some of the most telling pages were removed in 1891 by city officials who feared how evidence of this anomaly might be used in northern presses and abolitionist pamphlets. Portions of Gadsden's private journals were sequestered in restricted files. Access required gubernatorial approval. Whispers replaced open debate. Scholars who brush against the case encounter fragments, a letter here, a ledger entry there, and then walls. The official story offers tidy explanations. Clerical error, confusion between similar individuals, the fallibility of memory. But Gadsden's notebooks betray a precision that resists simple dismissal. He built his reputation on exactitude. The missing pages make the ledger a wound, and in a city structured by commerce in human lives, wounds are kept hidden where they might make others uncomfortable. The arc of the Ryan's Mart events resists neat resolution. If we accept the ledgers at face value, then something occurred in Charleston in 1844 that was not merely a string of fraudulent sales, but a sequence of reckonings. Men forced, whether by a woman's conversation or by some other vector, to confront the private arithmetic of their public lives. If we reject the documentation as mistake or fabrication, we must still explain why so many careful men altered their courses in the months that followed. What remains is a ledger that insists on its own strangeness and a quiet archive that refuses casual viewing, as if whatever truth the pages contain were fragile enough to be damaged by exposure. In the weeks and months after, conversations softened into omission. The men who could not speak substituted behavior for confession. They repaired reputations with silence and with new private acts that sometimes resembled atonement and sometimes resembled escape. Deline, whatever and whoever she was, left no trace beyond the legal paper that freed her and the ruins of 19 lives. The restricted pages remain locked where city archivists placed them, and the question endures: did a single woman, carried from nowhere by a smooth-tongued factor, compel Charleston's elite to see themselves truly? And if so, what then becomes of a society built where sight has always been optional? Her disappearance should have ended the matter. In most cities, in most eras, the vanishing of one woman, even one scarred by such an improbable trail of paper, would dissolve into the larger haze of unrecorded lives. But Charleston carried echoes. The men who had encountered her wore subtle traces of that night-long education, like burns hidden beneath fine fabric. Their altered behavior spread through society as rumor first, then as uneasy recognition. Gadsden felt these changes more acutely than the rest. Each day after the final sale, he opened the ledgers that had once been a source of pride and found his own handwriting unbearable. Column after column of names, appraisals, notes on condition and behavior. What he had once regarded as necessary order now vibrated with a kind of cruelty he could no longer translate into figures. Every ledger page became a testament, each valuation a wound traced in ink. He moved through Ryan's Mart as though walking the rooms of a house that no longer recognized him. The walls seemed too narrow, the steps too loud. The sound of the auction bell, once a familiar summons, now struck him like the toll of a warning he had ignored for too many years. Conversations with buyers felt like reenactments of a ritual he had been forced to scribe, but could no longer morally perform. He conducted sales quietly, mechanically, performing the work of a man he no longer believed himself to be. Brunson visited him frequently. The former constable behaved with the careful gait of someone approaching an injured creature, unsure whether it might bolt or collapse. Gadsden showed him the manumission documents Chevs had filed, pages marred with jagged handwriting that formed neither full sentences nor coherent defense, but instead fragments of realization. Brunson read them slowly, his eyes darkening. He couldn't survive it, he murmured at last. Understanding himself, that's what did him in. Gadsden said nothing. He recognized the shape of Chevs's handwriting. He had seen similar distortions in his own private notes, written in the long hours after Delene's questioning. His hand had trembled then, shrinking his script into hesitant strokes, as if he feared marking the paper too deeply, as if any pressure would rupture something that had already fractured inside him. Fall waned. Winter approached with a thin, metallic cold that seeped into the city's brick and bone. In December, reports of Sheev's decline reached Gadsden in fragments. A banker mentioned the sale of thousands of acres. A factor whispered that Chev's family considered him unwell. A physician hinted, in the manner of a man terrified to speak plainly, that the former planter suffered from an affliction of the mind, though no physical disease could be identified. The truth that could not be documented was this: the conversation had hollowed him. In March of 1847, word of Chev's death circulated through Charleston. 44 years old. Heart failure, the certificate claimed. Those who had seen him near the end said he looked decades older. Gadsden read the announcement in the newspaper and felt a stillness settle over him. Not relief, not sorrow, but something colder, like the pause before a truth reasserts itself. By then, he had left Charleston for Baltimore. He carried boxes of ledgers and his private journals with him, relics of the commerce he had once perfected. In Baltimore, he attempted, repeatedly, to write an account of the events of 1844. Manuscript after manuscript remained unfinished. He began with factual precision, recounting transactions, dates, names. But inevitably, he reached a point where narrative structure faltered beneath the weight of the thing itself, the part he could not articulate without unraveling. The pages broke off mid-sentence. Sometimes he crossed out whole passages. Other times he simply stopped writing and did not resume. No one read these drafts until after his death in 1863. Pneumonia carried him off with a swiftness that spared him the final siege of Charleston. When archivists later sorted through his papers, they found his last attempt at recording the matter. A few paragraphs written in an unsteady hand. I have tried to explain what happened. My profession trained me to record truth with precision, but some truths resist the structure of ink. She made us count the people we had reduced to tally marks. She made us see them. No punishment could have matched the punishment of understanding. The manuscript ended there. It was unclear whether exhaustion or despair had stopped him. When his papers were delivered to Charleston in the 1870s, city officials read the anomalous ledger entries with growing alarm. The South was raw then, newly battered, newly watched. The idea that northern newspapers might seize upon a series of inexplicable sales to craft a moral commentary on the Old South terrified those responsible for the city's public image. They removed the pages that referenced Deline. A discreet memorandum was attached. For restricted archives, sensitive nature requires gubernatorial approval. They buried the evidence with bureaucratic efficiency. The surviving records are therefore incomplete. Researchers who follow the trail encounter odd inconsistencies. Letters that reference buyers suddenly abandoning their estates. Banking notes that show unexpected loans. Gossip in private correspondence about a woman whose presence unmade men. But the full ledger sequence, the 17 transactions, the notes in the margins, the private journal entries, sits behind locked doors. Few have seen it. Fewer still acknowledge its existence. Among historians, quiet speculation spreads like a fragile vine. Some posit clerical error, though Gadsden's reputation resists such slander. Others imagine an elaborate fraud, though no motive accounts for the self-destruction of wealthy men. A few allow for something stranger, that an unclassifiable intrusion occurred in Charleston that year, a kind of reckoning not born of law or protest, but of conversation. The question that lingers is not merely how such a pattern was possible, but what transpired during those nights when each buyer sat alone with Deline. The notes she inspired, when they survived, suggest no threats, no violence, only dialogue. A patient dismantling of self-deception. A woman reciting names, recounting fates, asking questions. The weapon, if it can be called that, was knowledge. Men who had spent their lives defending slavery as economic necessity, as divine order, as inherited right. These men found themselves unable to survive the weight of seeing their own hands clearly. Most people, Deline had told Gadsden, die without ever confronting what they are complicit in. But these 19 were made to see. That vision undid them. As for Deline's nature, speculation ranges from the rational to the occult. Some describe her as a uniquely educated woman whose intelligence threatened fragile men. Others whisper of something older, something sent into the world for reasons not recorded in mortal archives. Gadsden, in his final manuscript, refused to speculate. Whether she was exactly what she appeared to be, he wrote, or something else entirely, does not alter what we learned. In the end, the record leaves us with more shadows than shapes. The pages removed in 1891 remain sealed. The city denies their relevance. But inside private circles of scholarship, the same questions return like a tide. How could a woman with no documented origin be sold repeatedly with perfect legal documentation? Why did so many powerful men unravel in her presence? And what truth could be so devastating that merely understanding it destroyed the very people who profited from its concealment. Perhaps the simplest explanation is the most unsettling: that for 8 months in 1844, in a city built upon the commerce of human lives, justice did not arrive in the form of courts or armies. It arrived as a woman who asked questions, and those questions broke men who had never before been required to answer. Some say the archives hold more than ledgers, that deeper in the restricted collection rests a set of personal notes written by a clerk who glimpsed the removed pages before they were locked away. According to rumor, the notes end with a single line: "If the truth teaches, it teaches without mercy." And so we are left with a story that unsettles the boundary between history and its shadows. A woman sold 19 times. Conversations that unmade the powerful. Pages sealed for over a century. A lesson whispered beneath the official record. One Charleston has never fully acknowledged. What do you think happened in those closed rooms? What truth could a single voice reveal that would shake the foundations of a society so deeply invested in silencing it? Let me know your thoughts, and if this story lingers with you, as it lingers with those who have studied its fragments, consider subscribing for more forgotten histories hidden beneath dust and silence.